and figure out how to use them best. Because everybody has certain gifts, and whether they have ADHD or they don't have ADHD, I help them discover what are those gifts, how do you want to use those gifts, and most importantly, what are the steps that you need to take or want to take to create that vision that you have for yourself, whether it's a child wanting to do better in school or be more socially happy, or it's adults wanting to really find a balance in his or her life and understand better, how do I function? How do I improve my relationships? How do I get that happiness that I'm looking for? So I work with them to create that vision, to create the steps to get to that vision, and to really work with the little details, because so often we think, I want to climb Mount Everest. Well, what do we have to do before we climb Mount Everest? Can we just walk up to the mountain and climb it?
Train.
Train, absolutely. So that takes a lot of little baby steps, because we've got to really work ourselves up to some of the goals that we see for ourselves. And to a child, some of the goals they have might feel like climbing Mount Everest when they have a challenge. So that's a little bit about what I do. So what I'd like to do is open up to a little bit of questions, and I think you did, Larry, ask the question. So if I think I have ADHD or I think my child has it, what do I do? So the first place to go really is your physician, to describe what it is that you or you feel your child is challenged with. That's really a first step. There are, and it's often difficult to find, but there are doctors who do specialize in diagnosing things like ADHD or bipolar or other kinds of challenges when we're just not sure whether our child or for ourselves that something might be going on more than just the typical, okay, I can't remember where my keys are, or I'm at work and I just really, I'm just struggling to do the organizational work at work, and people are getting really frustrated with me, and I don't get it, I don't know why I'm experiencing this, what's going on here. In those cases, it could be something more than just frustration, and one of the biggest challenges that I've seen as I work with people and as I've seen with my own family is that when children are not diagnosed very young, they act differently. They feel differently. They have different kinds of relationships with their peers, maybe not as many relationships. They don't get why people don't get them. Sometimes we as parents don't get our own child. We've asked them to pick the sock up in the middle of the floor 20 times, and you go in the room, and not only is that sock on the floor, but everything else in the closet.
That's right.
And why can't they do it? Why can't they clean it up? Are they just being lazy? What's going on here? So families can get frustrated, right? When they don't understand what's going on. And so when we have the opportunity to look at the child or look at the adult and say, hey, what's going on here, and get that diagnosis, there are several options. One of them, certainly is medication. Not right for everybody, but medication can be extraordinarily helpful to help the chemistry of the brain of the person's experiencing this disorder to really kind of tune in and program in better. We often hear about the stimulants, the Ritalin and other stimulants that are similar to that, because they actually do kind of charge up the brain in a very positive way for someone with ADD that helps that person think more clearly, because now they're getting a little more of the brain balancing. But it's not just about stimulants, it's extraordinarily complex. Other medications may be needed depending on how that individual manifests ADHD. How much hyperactivity is there? Is there some bipolar with that? Is there some depression? Sometimes people are experiencing depression with ADHD, which can be ADHD combined with some other underlying situation. It can be depression just because, hey, nobody gets me. How come I'm expected to do things the way everybody else does it when that's not how I do it? And Joanne, you pointed out a really good example of children in the classroom, one standing over here, but they're still listening. So we need to give that child the opportunity to grow and to learn in the way that is best for him or for her. And as parents who may be experiencing the same challenge or may not be, because what we find with children with ADHD is that almost all the time, or much of the time statistically, one or both parents are presenting with similar chemistry. May not be exactly the same, but often it is similar. And sometimes the parents just don't get it. They haven't looked at themselves to see, and to understand that maybe they're experiencing it. So a lot of times you get a lot of dramatic tension in the family because the parent doesn't understand why does the kid now have not just one sock, but the entire room piled on the floor. So the parent's frustrated, thinking, not being heard. And so sometimes the messages that the children are getting and the feelings that the parents have are really in conflict. And that's certainly not the situation that anybody wants in their family. And when it goes undiagnosed, it can really become quite difficult. So my passion really is to get that information out there, that if you see these differences going on in yourself as an adult or in your children, whether they be young or a little bit older, that there are ways to really help life feel more balanced and to help that person and yourself, if you're the parent, feel better about yourself. Because we feel better, we function much better. Our family functions better, we feel happier. And one should never feel that despite the challenges that one has, that one cannot fully express what it is that a person has inside, what gifts they have, what beautiful things that are inside that sometimes just get buried.
Does that have something to do with anger? Why you're angry all the time?
Absolutely. Not only for the person experiencing that.
Because my neighbor is like that. He's always angry, never nice to anybody. You say hi to him.
Sometimes that's true. Maybe that person's experiencing it.
Yeah,
maybe
because
they're dealing
he's
with
not nice at all. You don't say hi to you. You say hi to him, he'll look the other way. Look the other way.
It's certainly possible. We never know what someone's experiencing, right?
Right.
Because
I don't say
everyone's.
nothing.
Yes. What's your name? Rosalind. Yes.
Sometimes food exacerbate the hyperactivity within those persons?
Great question. A lot of people feel that foods can contribute to hyperactivity, and there's certainly, there's certainly. I'm sorry, Rosalind?
What I had heard was like red dye and some sugars will exacerbate. It was a little boy that used to live on Newfoundland, and his mother, I had to watch him one time because he got home. She had to go take her other son to a doctor's appointment, and he was getting home before the other little boy, before they got home. So she said, make sure he has nothing with red dye in it. Don't give him any sugars. Check his lunchbox when he comes in and see if he has anything, because he trades lunches with the kids in his classroom, and he will trade it for candy because she doesn't give him candy because she said he'd be bouncing off the walls.
Ooh.
And so I was wondering, whether that was so, in cases.
Well, some people feel that it definitely contributes to the behavioral patterns. Certainly, diet is very important for all of us, and it definitely affects how we feel. There's no doubt about that. It is just one piece of what can help someone with ADHD function better. And certainly, particularly recently, a lot has been written about sugar being very addictive. And we all know what we experience when we eat a lot of sugar. on many levels, from, how we feel inside to how we might behave. So it's not surprising that many people feel that how we eat does affect and perhaps exacerbate a condition of ADHD. So it's a great question. So, when we're talking about children and children that go undiagnosed, so a lot of times for those children, when the parents don't understand, why this kid is acting so different or seems to be lazy, they might kind of get on the kid's case, right? Maybe say things that don't make the child feel very good about themselves. Sometimes the parents don't feel great about themselves, right? Anybody experience that?
Yeah.
And so what happens with ADHD is that sometimes when you pile on a lot of this negative messaging, it kind of, I like to say, kind of gums up the works. Like, when you're on the computer and you keep plugging at it because you can't get it to come up with something, and it just sort of gets stuck. Well, sometimes those feelings and thoughts kind of get stuck in people's minds. And as they grow, if they've never been diagnosed and they have kind of all this negative stuckness, as they develop, sometimes it's hard as an adult to even access whatever executive function that we talked about. Remember, that's the part of the brain that helps us organize. Sometimes a lot of those thoughts kind of get stuck in there, and it really can make it difficult for the youngster as they grow older or become an adult to function to their optimal place. So what we do in coaching is we really try to help them kind of get some of that stuff unstuck and help them see, okay, these are my gifts, this is what I really can do. And yeah, when I was a kid, we used to think, I really couldn't organize things, or I really wasn't that smart because I didn't do things the way everyone else does. But in fact, I have these certain talents, and I know I can do these. And how am I going to get unstuck from some of this way of thinking so that I can really use my brain the best way? So we said that one way to help is the proper medication, and it's important to get the right diagnosis and to get the right doctors on board who understand not only just the need perhaps for stimulant, but some of the other underlying things that may or may not be going on, whether there's that extra hyperactivity or not, whether there's something we call mood differences. Now, when we talk about bipolar, that's a very strong diagnosis for someone who has significant mood challenge, but sometimes just with ADD, there's just some, even lesser mood fluctuations. Might be, one moment happy and the next moment not so happy, might react more strongly to things that we say and do, might just come out and say things very quickly about how they're feeling, and it might not really fit in, with what's going on. So there's a lot of variety in the way people kind of come across. Does anyone see that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Do you have something? Tell me your name again. I'm so sorry.
I'm Patricia.
Patricia.
I'm curious if, because I ended up with brain injury, traumatic brain injury. So I'm wondering if there's help for the ADHD, because before the second accident, the second brain injury, I got to a point where I was able to organize very well. But now I can't organize at all.
That's interesting. Oh, that's interesting. May I ask your name?
Liz.
Liz. So, with a traumatic brain injury?
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's not surprising because there are, definitely kinds of challenges after traumatic brain injury that certainly mimic and are very much like ADHD. So, Patricia, may I ask you, permission just to ask you a question? So, were you diagnosed with ADHD before the traumatic brain injury?
No. My son was as a child, and I had him. I was 21 when I had my son. I wasn't diagnosed. Even my first head injury, unfortunately, was in my chart, but then when HMO and everything fell apart, files were lost, and I guess from my injuries and too much going on in the household and business, I didn't get the follow-up help I needed. And then it wasn't until an accident in 2006 that they discovered, okay, you have a cumulative brain injury. So I was put on the Adderall a bit after that, and I just don't understand why I can't get back to organizing or anything, even being on the Adderall. I just don't understand.
And if I can ask, when you take the Adderall, what do you feel that's different than when you're not on it?
Well, it's hard to say because I take it in the morning, it's extended release, so that I go to sleep at night. But before that, I had a lot more impulsivity. I'm trying to remember that bad memory and time frame. I'm trying to remember.
So if you were to think about, just like in the day, because Adderall does drop off at a certain hour, and you're kind of left, okay, now I'm just on my own, so to speak.
It's hard to get thoughts together to the point where you're like a blank slate, or I'm like a blank slate. And it's frustrating, very frustrating.
Absolutely frustrating.
And planning and trying to, it just works on the frustration and the anxiety.
Absolutely. Oh, thank you so much. Thanks, Ann.
Difficult, especially with everything going on holidays and then you have to plan.
Absolutely. So that's a really difficult challenge that you have, Patricia. And so not only do you have the traumatic brain injury, but you've got a lot of stress in your life. And then you've got the frustration of feeling like, I just can't do things the way I want to. And that in and of itself, those stressors really cause us to have even more problems organizing, thinking. I mean, for the person who does not have the challenge of ADHD, just add on some stressors, whether it's too much holidays or whether it's, God forbid, illness in the family or whatever those stressors are, the person even without the ADHD is feeling like they can't organize, like they're going to forget and they can't remember what they thought about a minute ago. So you put all those factors together and that can really create some challenges, and the more it kind of feeds on itself from what you're saying.
Yeah,
so the more you get frustrated, the more your brain shuts down. So the question really is, okay, how am I going to move forward so that I can organize better? And so, in the coaching, when we coach, that's something that we work on. We work on looking at, when I am doing something well.
You're working on fixing the problem.
Yeah.
But your problem, the problem that you had, and your coach is trying to help you fix it.
Absolutely. So it's like looking at yourself and saying, okay, when I'm thinking of the last thing that I did that I felt really good about, it just kind of worked for me. And okay, what time of day was that I did that? Some people are morning people. Some people, are night owls. And kind of saying, okay, well, it was morning, let's say. That worked really well for me. Yes, Rosalind?
No,
I was raising your hand? Get your...
I was trying to, my watch caught up on my desk.
Oh, no problem, no problem. Rosalind's enthusiastic, I can see.
Yeah.
So it's really, about trying to help yourself, figure out, okay, when am I most lucid? When does it work for me? And taking sort of a breath in that moment, and because I work a lot with people just to create some balance. So when we're really frustrated and we're really just like, ooh, just want to kind of like throw our hands up and say, I just can't remember and I just can't take it. What we want to do is we want to take a deep breath. Does anyone ever just stop and take a deep breath?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Great. And
That
how
helps
does that
when you're
work?
angry.
Yeah, that's great,
When you're
Larry.
angry, because I got angry at my neighbor the other day when he was acting ignorant We're not gonna help them out. You know, we're trying to be nice.